Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Tuesday, March 11th, 2025. This is episode 332. Government is usually the problem. All right, but first, we're going to run through some news stories just to sort of provide some context and also just to talk about a couple things in passing. Syria, we are supporting Al Qaeda, the group that basically carried out the 9/11 attacks. So it's kind of interesting. They call themselves something else now, HRT or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. The new government there is Al Qaeda. Jeffrey Sachs said that those people are basically the foot soldiers of U.S. foreign policy. Um, So it goes back to Afghanistan, where the U.S. funded and trained the Mujahideen, who were resisting against Russia in Afghanistan. And the plan was to make Afghanistan Russia's. Uh, I think it was at the time they were still the Soviet Union, so the Soviet Union's Vietnam. They wanted them to suffer the way the United States did in Vietnam. Well, this group in Syria, they're going around and murdering people that they don't like, including many, many Christians. And so it just bothers me. I emphasize that point because there are so many people who claim to be Christians who ignore that fact, right? They just because they have to go all in on U.S. foreign policy in Israel and in Ukraine, so they have to go along with what's going on in Syria. And so they ignore the fact that they're murdering Christians there in the same way that Israel is murdering Christians in Gaza, right? That doesn't really seem to faze them all too much. And so I thought it was just kind of interesting that these same people support literal Nazis in Ukraine and in Syria. We're supporting Al Qaeda, and they're perfectly fine with it. I realized something. They are Nazis, right? And so that's what I thought was kind of interesting is that they don't see it, right? And how you can sort of think yourself to be on the side of right, never ever thinking that your crusade for what you consider right turns you into a Nazi. But there it is. Another thing in the news was Trump is now going after Massie again. When Massie voted against a spending bill that Trump wanted like 4 years ago, had to have been 4 or 5 years ago, Trump went after him, called him a grandstander, whatever, and again going after him. It's times like this times like these that I think Trump doesn't know what he's doing. Instead of going public, he should have just called them and explained that he needs a weaker dollar. So on the one hand, he needs to decrease government, but on the other hand, increase spending, right? And then Trump turns around and says that he should be primaried, right? Thomas Massie, primaried, but none of the rhinos. Seriously? I mean, this is what's really frustrating about Trump. Like it's that whole 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps back. I don't know. Um, and so maybe the things that seem like a good thing, he stumbles into it. I don't know. It's just really mind-boggling, and it's which is why I always say, it's the principle, not the person. But it just bothers me because he makes it so easy for his enemies and his detractors to make him a target, right? And so I would much rather he doesn't engage in the art of the deal and just simply come clean and tell everyone what he's doing, how he's doing it. I think it would do a lot to calm the world down, maybe even to communicate to more politicians that this is the way. Another thing Trump is doing is the censorship on college campuses to shut down the Gaza pro-Palestinian pro-Palestinian protests, right? And everyone is saying they're doing it because Israel is asking them to do it. I'm a free speech absolutist, and that ain't right. Now, if they were engaging in crimes like vandalizing, or impeding other students from their study, well, then yeah, go after them, sure. But otherwise, you just leave them alone, right? And then later on, they regret everything that they did when they were younger, or not. They never grow up. And in the same vein, you have people who probably are now out of college torching Teslas, right? Setting fire to Tesla vehicles, also shooting and trying to set fire Tesla dealerships. Um, Now that, I mean, is clearly violent, but again, the news is reporting it as being peaceful. How that's peaceful, I do not know. But I don't think you can be pro-environment and also set fire to Teslas at the same time. The smoke, the CO2 emissions alone just cancel out everything that they supposedly fought for over the last few years. So it's just silly. Unless, of course, their environmentalism was just a whole bunch of virtue signaling, in which case that makes more sense, right? So what's the latest trend that I have to hop on? I'll undo and contradict everything I did last week, but hey, at least on the I'm among the popular crowd. And I wonder, too, now that USAID was basically mostly dismantled, where they're getting the money to do it, right? Unless it is just simply individuals now. Like before, you would have had lots of people in the streets, lots of people just simply doing it. But now it's just like one or two people here or there, it seems, right? Highly motivated individuals, let's just say. All right, so that was a rundown on some of the more crazier news stories that we heard today. I thought I would touch on them and just say something, but none of it would have been enough anyway. I'm just too tired to think. Any, I don't want to think about it. It's just so stupid and frustrating. So I'll just share with you a conversation I had with the middle schoolers again today, and I think they realized that if they ask me a half interesting question, they can avoid doing work for the rest of the day. So today, a student asked me, and I think it was a hypothetical. What if a single mom is in an apartment in New York City, and the rent is was raised, and so now she can't afford the rent, and now she's going to get evicted, right? So she can't pay the rent. And it was just sort of that sob story thing that a typical girl would share to try to persuade you, manipulate you, right? I talked about this with the whole Dave Smith thing when he gets in a fight with his wife, and he's like, by logic, you win that fight, but you lost, man, because right? Because his wife said, yeah, you won, but that that hurts me. Total manipulation, right? So, so in the same way too, most people, when they want to keep a really bad government program, you're going to find a sob story, and you're going to exercise racialization by making that one example the stereotype archetype of everyone who's in that situation, right? A sad, poor, pathetic mom who can't make rent, right? And, on the surface, yeah, it's feel sorry for that person, right? But, and my answer, I gotta tell you, so when I started answering her, uh, tears started coming out of her eyes, right? Okay, so she's in eighth grade, and I'm like, wait, why? Why? What did I say? And so the whole time in my head, I'm like, I don't think I was that harsh. I mean, I know her mom also teaches at the school, so I'm always careful with her, but tears were just rolling down the whole time. So after class, I went up to her and I was like, "Did you know this woman in New York?" And she's like, "Oh no, it was my contact lens started bothering me, and that's why." It looked like I was crying. But anyway, so I said, you know, you can't make the landowner, right? The person who owns the apartment and renting it out to her, you can't make that person responsible for all of the mom's life choices, right? You can't say, well, these are all the choices I did in my life, which led me to this point. So have pity on me. Well, wait a minute. No, how am I now supposed to be responsible for all the choices that you made in your past? No, I can't do that. You're here, now you have choices. Now, I always say that chances are a person like that has family, but she can't go to that family because she burned those bridges. Why did she burn those bridges? Arrogance. Maybe she thought that she could make it alone. She didn't like her parents, right? Because they were telling her to be responsible and stay away from irresponsible guys. I don't know. But the first thing that she should probably more likely do, and she would have more success, is that she has to go back to her family, repair those bridges with her family. That would require her to change. That would require her to apologize that maybe, her parents were right. If she didn't go down this road that she defiantly said, this is my life, I'm going to live. Well, now you got to repair those bridges, which means you have to admit that your choices weren't all that great. And people don't like doing that, right? It's the opposite of the song, Ain't Too Proud to Beg. Yeah, they're too proud to beg, right? But so you're not going to beg. Instead, you're going to make your land owner uh, let you live there for free. That doesn't make sense, right? And second of all, the landowner usually has to collect rent so he can pay his bills. And if he doesn't pay his bills, particularly property taxes, he could probably lose the property, right? And he has bills to pay. Rent generally goes up because taxes go up. Inflation is going up, right? I mean, most people would rather they don't change the rent. I mean, know personally, if a few times I had to change the amount that I was charging for various things, I would rather they not go up, the price not go up. But with inflation and taxes and all those other prices that go up as a result of inflation, then rent has to go up as well. Now, no one wants that. But then you got to ask yourself, why do taxes go up? Well, that's because the politicians want more money. And maybe they had enough socialists in society that allow them to raise taxes, right? And most of those people who say raise those taxes probably don't have to pay those taxes directly anyway. They don't. Uh, Landowners would also rather not kick out good tenants, right? Like once you find a good tenant, they pay on time, they don't trash the place, then you would rather that they stay there as your tenant, right? And as I was saying this, two of the students in the class, they shared that their parents have properties, right? And they rent them out to people. And one shared a nightmare story where someone refused to pay, and to the point where he had to take him to court. And once the court sided with the landowner, the tenant trashed the place before she left, right? And maybe he'd be able to recoup some of his losses, but probably not, right? They wouldn't even pay the 5 months of rent, so how are they going to pay for all the repairs? No, it's not. That's not right. So is it fair that the landowner has to pay for all of that out of pocket? Probably not. And then the other student talked about how the city raised property taxes, just all of a sudden across the board, and it was due. And so he had to come up with a lot of money on the spot. Otherwise, he would lose a lot of those properties. Now, the city, and particularly the city that I live, where a lot of these kids are from, uh, some people have said it was the worst city, the most corrupt city in the United States. And I'm sure it might have been a little bit of hyperbole, but it is pretty bad. I've seen some stats like police asset forfeiture seizures, right? They were number one. And the average take, like how much they took from a person was like 128 bucks. But at the end of the year, they collected like $6 million. How many people did you have to stop to get 6 million when the average is only 120? I don't know. It's pretty bad. Uh, so landowners would rather not kick out good tenants, right? Because bad ones trash the place. And the city even raises taxes to the point where it's not worth repairing the units. Like you don't collect enough in rent to keep maintain the property, right? Because you're not allowed to raise the rent. And that's how you get the slums, right? So slums exist where everything is broken, there's no running water or something like that. It's because you're not allowed to raise the taxes, so it's not worth it to you to fix the property, maintain the property, and so it becomes run down. Um, the city where I live also, I knew someone who worked for the city government in some capacity, and he told me that what they would regularly do is if there was a neighborhood that they wanted to develop, right? Make it a new trendy neighborhood. What they would do is they would send out assessors to assess property values. And they would go through the neighborhood and then they would send letters to everyone who lives in the neighborhood. And they would say, oh, up to this point, we thought your house was only worth $30,000, but we reassessed the property and it's $300,000. But we should have done this 5 years ago, so you owe us back taxes for 5 years on a property valued at $300,000. And so the property owner cannot even sell their house and be able to cover all of the taxes. And so the city just seizes the property, right? And once they seize it, they kick out the previous owners, they resell it to the builders or the developers or the contractors or the construction workers or whatever. It doesn't matter. They get rid of them so then they can do whatever they want with the property. Another strategy that they use is they tell law enforcement stop policing the area. Crime goes up because it's so dangerous. People flee the neighborhood. It drives down the property values of the houses so that someone comes along and says, oh, this is a slum. We're going to target it for urban renewal, gentrification, call it whatever you will. And we're going to seize all of the properties through eminent domain. But because they drove all the prices down, then they really don't have to pay a lot for the properties, right? That's a very often used strategy in this city. Also, if someone sees a nice location for a certain kind of business, but there's already a business in that property, what they do is they send an inspector through and they come up with all these violations, right? Oh, I saw a cockroach, or oh, I saw mouse droppings. You come up with so many violations that in order for them to come up to code, they can't, and so they have to sell the property, and usually they're selling it to the person who wanted it sold to them in the first place. That happens a lot as well. I've even seen video where they caught the person, a city inspector, doing that, making up all these charges so that they could come and take the property. So costs are also high because of zoning restrictions. Mises Media had a video, it's called How to Make Home Ownership More Affordable. Licensing, zoning, all of that stuff contributes to the increased costs of housing. And I do remember in California when they were trying to make affordable housing, they ended up making units that were $750,000 each, right? Some affordable housing, right? But see, that's the thing. When you construct something, it has to be according to all of these different regulations and standards. And so that drives up the cost of housing. Now, we have the technology to make houses faster and therefore cheaper, right? I talked about building fast in episode 138. And I think it was around the time when that bridge in Maryland was knocked out by a cargo ship that lost power, right? And I used to talk about fast build in all of my classes, but China years ago could build a 52-story building in 19 days or something like that, right? All with all the electricity, plumbing, all of that stuff, 19 days, like less than a month. It's insane. And so even if you thought that was unsafe, well, okay, take 2 months. A 50-story building, right? How many units would be in a 50-story building? You can turn one of them out every month. Housing is not a problem anymore, right? And affordable housing is everywhere, is plentiful. And what stands in the way, of course, is zoning, regulations, city government, right? And so, any way you look at it, any problem that you might see in society, why it persists is because government created the problem in the first place, right? So, if you have more supply, the price of the housing goes down, but of course, ever since what, like the 70s, I guess, where people figured out that they could turn their home into equity, right? It could be an asset. And so they don't want the value of their home to go down. They want it to go up. Also, by having really expensive homes and neighborhoods, you can keep poor people out. You can keep undesirables out. I remember when the first time we moved into a suburb as an aged family. It was like in that area, we were the first Asians, right? And it was a really nice neighborhood. And my dad, he penny pinched like crazy. And that's how he did. Like he never had a lucrative, high-paying job. He just never spent any of his money. Um, So without all the regulations, right? In the 1970s, I think it was a lot easier for my dad to move into a nice neighborhood. So without all of the regulations, people can move freely. They can improve their lives. People then who already live in those neighborhoods, they would have to be more flexible, friendly, try to figure out ways to have harmony, or else you just move. You move to another neighborhood, and it wouldn't be that difficult, right? Because there would be few regulations, and housing would be quite affordable. I had to go to Center City for my arbitration hearing, and the building that I went into it was a law firm. It was huge. It was like 50 stories, but had a lot of security. So you could, I guess, create a expensive, high-end housing simply because of perks like that, like concierge, security, private security, all of this stuff. If you wanted to do the same thing, except take advantage of uh, uh, higher productivity in building of housing and getting government out of the way of building codes. Or you can live in the suburbs like I prefer, where I don't have to talk to anyone, right? I don't have to even see my neighbors. I'm okay with that, right? My kid just got back from Japan. He had the jazz band went over there. University paid for it all. Or donors paid for it all. It was pretty off the hook. Anyways, one of the things that he first noticed was how clean it was over there, right? So not only do we have slums and expensive housing, even when the housing is a dump, over there, it's spotless, right? You could have even not eaten off the streets. We could have that too, but we have moral hazards everywhere. We have regulations, we have welfare, and then no one cares, right? No one owns anything, and so you don't care about maintaining it, keeping it nice, right? And after a while, you just get used to the garbage ever flying everywhere. You know, dirty, filthy cities with dirty, filthy subways. Like I joked around with a lot of the students and I said, you know, you take a subway in Asia, it's spotless, right? It doesn't smell like pee, right? And I showed them a video. You can YouTube, right, a Korean subway station. And they were asking me like, what's that? And I said, I told you it's a subway. And compared to the big city subways, I mean, come on, not even, there's no comparison, right? So uh, why are things the way they are here in the United States? Well, because government has created these problems. And then when they try to solve these problems, which they created in the first place, they make them worse. And this is why rent is too high. That's it for this episode. I will talk to you next time.